All right, what's up, guys? It's Analyst, and we're back again. We weren't planning on doing a second part series to this, but you guys really wanted it, so here we are. We got running backs part two. The first episode we went through first 15 running backs. We added a little extra at the end, but it was CMC, Saquon, Zeke, Kamara, Dalvin Cook, Mixon, Jacobs, Henry, Drake, Chubb, Sanders, Eckler, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Bell, and Aaron Jones. So if you guys want to hear about any of those players, go check out part one. It's on both of our podcasts, me and Upper Hand, as well as on my YouTube. So go check that out. But all right, you ready to just roll straight into part two? We got a lot of guys to cover.
Let's do it, man. Let's do it. By the way, I was always planning on doing a part two. I don't know about you, but I'm glad I'm doing it with you. I'm glad you agreed.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, with I think we basically went over all the important quarterbacks and tight ends. So I think we should definitely do a wide receiver part two.
Oh yeah, 100%. How
You
many?
weren't there for part one.
I wasn't there for part one, but I'm definitely down to do part
We
two.
did 17.
Oh, okay, that's pretty good.
15 plus two extras that Rapper had. So
Nice, nice.
yeah, we can probably cover the rest. But all right, so let's just jump straight into it. So first guy I want to talk about, Todd Gurley. So Todd Gurley is someone I've been down on the last 2 years. Obviously, when you have something like degenerative arthritis in your knee, it's not something you want to buy into. Um, the thing with that is like he's gonna have that role to himself, and at the same time, I'm not expecting a huge role in the passing game for him like Devontae Freeman had last year. But there is like 200 plus vacated targets available, and the only person that's filled that void is Hayden Hurst and Gurley. So he could have some targets going his way. He's got a much better offensive line than he did last year, and he managed to play a good chunk of last year. I think he only missed one game due to a quad strain.
That's right.
But he's definitely not himself, and he's definitely not the same running back. This is still a very pass heavy team. Um, yeah, he's not going to have as much opportunity, but he can still end up with 10 touchdowns. So he's growing on me a little bit. But what's your take on Gurley?
I like his price.
Yeah.
He's like at the 2-3 turn. Like I've seen most of the drafts that I've done, mock drafts at least. I was able to get him like in the middle of the third round, which is I think is good value for him. I think he makes a great RB2, to be honest. Like if I grabbed a wide receiver in one of the first two rounds, I'm good grabbing him. In like the third round. He played, like you said, 15 games last year. Averaged 80% of snaps in that second half of the season. It didn't seem like the arthritis in his knee kept him from getting work, right? I guess they tried to get those other guys involved, but they were just like, this is not going to do it for us. So they just kind of put him back in a workhorse type of role. I think like the knee issues, I think it did affect his explosiveness, right? I think that was
Mhm.
obvious. But the Falcons, they had an even worse running back playing the position last year in Devontae Freeman. And I love the role that Gurley's stepping into, to be honest. I think Devontae Freeman is washed. I've said that on multiple occasions, and that's my opinion. But he was averaging 17.3 touches per game last year, including 5 targets per game. There were 3 games last year where Freeman had 8 plus targets, and I think Gurley has the skill set to continue getting that type of work, and even more work in the running game than Freeman was getting. So I'm curious to know why you think Gurley wouldn't assume that passing work.
So for me, it's like when you see a guy like Gurley, I profile him more as like a bruiser, more of like a goal line, early down type back. Not that he's not capable of catching passes, but I think just a guy like Devontae Freeman, that's like his specialty, right? So a guy like Devontae Freeman, you want on those third down situations when you in those passing situations. And not saying Gurley can't be that guy as well, but if you're trying to limit his snaps on the field, maybe having him back in pass protection and going out wide for a pass is just, if you don't do it as much, it limits his time on the field. And they have other capable pass catchers too, like Ito Smith's not bad. And these aren't great running backs that I'm going to name, but these are guys who are capable pass catchers. Like Brian Hill played that role last year. Ito Smith is going to be there. So I just don't think he's going to have the same role Devontae Freeman had in the receiving game. I think he's definitely going to be involved, but
Right.
I wouldn't go as much to say like, oh, Devontae Freeman, what was it? He had like 79 targets. I don't even know how many targets he had last year, But
Well, he had 5 per game, and I think he played like 12 games or something like that. So it was up there. I mean, the thing
yeah,
with
like
Gurley,
70.
like his efficiency in the receiving game has been really good in his career.
Yeah.
9 year, like going back to his rookie year, I'm gonna go through it. So he's been in the league for 5 years now, right?
Hmm.
His yards per reception, nine yards per reception, 7.6, 12.3, 9.8, 6.7. That's
6.7
really
last
good.
year.
6.7 was last year, and 6.7 isn't that bad,
No, it's not bad for running back.
for a running back. But look at those other numbers. So I think he is, he caught 43 balls his sophomore year, 64, 59. So I think he's super capable. And then on top of that, he's efficient in the passing game. So I think he could definitely assume the same role that Freeman was getting. And if you look at like Freeman, what he was doing, he wasn't as efficient either. Like they were just
Hmm.
chucking the ball down to him.
Yeah, I think there
So
was a
yeah, no,
game
it's
where he had
interesting.
like
Like
9 catches. They just kept chucking it
yeah,
down.
dude. And that passing volume kept Freeman like as a solid RB2,
Hmm.
despite the fact that he was terrible. As a matter of fact, his Freeman's weighted opportunity was in the top 10 last season in PPR, right below Carson at number 8.
That's pretty good.
Right? But Freeman just didn't score any touchdowns in the run game, and he scored 4 in the receiving game, and I think he scored only 2 on the ground. So, with that offense being as potent as we think it's going to be, Gurley, I think he should have ample goal line opportunity. It's basically where he made up for his performance last year, right? He had 14 total touchdowns last year, so that was more of a anomaly, I guess. But yeah, for his price, I'm in on him. For an early third round pick, like when they signed him. I wasn't like really into it. But when I looked into it a little bit more, looked at how he played last year, and then the role that he's stepping into, and then what I've over time projected this offense to do, I'm like, you know what? It's really hard to hate on him and that role, while understanding that the upside is not like top 5, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Because Todd Gurley isn't the same guy, but he could be capable. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, and I'm kind of in a similar boat. Like I said, he's growing on me. I'm still not a believer he's going to get all that passing down work, but if he does, and it's not out of the realm of possibility, it could boost him up to that top 10 range. So it's definitely possible. But another guy who I want to talk about who is heavily involved in the passing game is David Johnson. So I have David Johnson here at 17. I had him at 15 at some point, kind of moved him down a little bit, but he's still floating in that solid running back 2 range, especially. Oh, and I'll say this in PPR. So if you guys have heard us talk before, we usually always just keep PPR as the regular, as the norm. So if you hear us talking, unless we say otherwise, like we'll say like, oh, in standard, maybe not, but just assume everything's PPR basically. But anyway, so last year Duke Johnson had 62 targets while averaging only 49% of the snaps. Um, so that's not bad for a guy playing 49% of the snaps. It's actually pretty good. But my phone's going off.
What's
And the
going on?
thing,
Any breaking news?
I don't even want to talk about the Redskins, bro. I don't even know what the hell
Oh
is
my
up with that
goodness.
organization. Either way, back to
Yeah,
some good news.
we're recording this. We're recording this podcast like a few hours after all the allegations have come through. Via the Washington Post. So I'm still trying to absorb it. Honestly, like I was hanging out with my kids to put them to sleep. And like in the middle of them taking a bath and stuff like that, I was like, looking at my phone. I'm like, what the hell is going on right now? So I haven't got a chance to like fully digest it, but it's some crazy shit.
It is some crazy shit. So I think it's on the Washington Post and some other articles. You have to pay for it. So I think some other articles copied it and put the gist of it there, so you can find it there. But back to DJ here. So he's never really had a great offensive line. Even like going back to his really, I think it was like his second year, he had that breakout year. So
Right.
even back to that year, he's never had a great offensive line. You look at his production from 2018, and I mean that offensive line was god awful. Even you look at the line from last year, that offensive line was god awful, and then he got injured. So on top of that, I feel like the injuries have been like unlucky injuries too. It hasn't been uh, like like I think he had like a chest injury this last season. I might
Yeah,
be wrong
back
on that.
like he had that back injury.
Back.
And then he had this like he had an ankle injury, right? But the ankle injury was also like weird. Like they didn't declare it a high ankle sprain. but then like people assumed it was a high ankle sprain because he was out so long. We couldn't figure out if it was the ankle or the back that was keeping him out.
Yeah.
Both. Like it was so much weird like injury reporting when it came to that. And then you had Christian Kirk a few weeks later. He had a high ankle sprain, and they were just like, "Yeah, he has a high ankle sprain." So like, it's just so hard to determine what was
But
going
why
on.
can't you be honest? But
That's
I
it.
mean, now in Houston, they don't have the best offensive line, right? It's a line that still needs work, but I think it's much better than what he had last year. It's definitely an upgrade. And then you have a guy like Deshaun Watson who can open things up for him. You have Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks to stretch the field deep. So we talked about Duke Johnson's targets, but we didn't really talk about too much about Carlos Hyde and what he did last year. I mean, Carlos Hyde, there was a game where Carlos Hyde, and I love bringing this up, he had 17 carries for 27 yards. And that doesn't sound promising. That doesn't sound great. But what it goes to show is that, like, Duke Johnson and Carlos Hyde had two different roles, right? So even like Carlos Hyde's role was to run it, run it, run it, and not stop running it. And Duke Johnson's role was to come in, catch a few passes, and that was that. But if you have a guy like DJ, what it tells me is that DJ could be on the field for all three downs. I don't like if they're not going to put Duke Johnson over Carlos Hyde when he's running 17 for 27. I don't know if they're really going to take DJ off the field, who is a capable pass catcher, to put Duke on the field and steal running work, whatever it is. So, point being, I think Duke's going to, I mean, not Duke, I think DJ is definitely going to be the primary ball carrier. He's definitely going to see a ton of running back targets. I mean, there's 150 available from from DeAndre Hopkins. We don't know Kenny Still situations. Both Brandon Cooks and Will Fuller can't stay healthy. I mean, we have concerns with Brandon Cooks about the concussions. And only other guy is Randall Cobb. But I think DJ's still going to be that short to intermediate guy. He's got a lot of PPR upside, even if he's not that freak athlete that we assumed him to be in that first season where he had that breakout season.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, are they allowed to even take him off the field since they traded him for DeAndre Hopkins? Or
They traded.
like
They traded. I think they gave a third rounder for Duke Johnson last year.
right, and he only comes in passing situations. So
49% of the time.
yeah, yeah. I don't know, man. Honestly, like Dave Johnson's one of the guys I'm struggling with the most as far as assessing like what to expect in 2020. I know he was hurt last year. Before week 6, he was fine. Like he was the RB5 in PPR up until
Mm-hmm.
that point. And like I said, many believe he had a high ankle sprain in week 6. I'm not sure that if that was ever made official. I don't think it was. I tried like going crazy looking for it. But when Christian Kirk had that high ankle sprain, they said it was a high ankle sprain. So I'm not sure why they kept his a secret if it was one. Then he had the
Yeah.
back issue, right? And I'm not sure. And that back issue was interesting because in those games after he had the back issue, like it just seemed like he was running with a piano on his back. That's what it looked like.
That's a good
But
way
yeah,
to
like you
describe it.
said, he's going to be a 3 down back, right? There's going to be value there. One of his best assets is receiving. So his weighted opportunity is going to be there as well. Carlos Hyde. So you mentioned Carlos Hyde. He averaged 16 carries a game, right, during the fantasy season. Wasn't involved in the passing game at all, right?
Yep.
So there is a possibility, and you touched on it, that DJ sees that plus a ton of work in the passing game with all the vacated targets, right? Now, is Duke Johnson? You think Duke Johnson is going to be just kicked to the curb while Johnson is healthy? I think that's a valid question because that would seem like a serious waste to me. You know what I'm saying? Like, do you think that there's a world where they have like a 65-35 split? Something like that? Do you think that's possible?
I think Duke's gonna kind of not Duke. I keep getting them
Well,
confused
they're
now.
both DJs, so
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. But I could honestly see David Johnson having a season similar to what Le'Veon Bell had last year, maybe
mm,
if not better,
interesting.
right? To where he's going to be involved in the passing game. Other guys are going to filter in here or there. I mean, Ty Montgomery, right? Maybe like if you combine Ty Montgomery and Bilal Powell, that would be Duke Johnson, and
Don't
then you have
don't hate on my boy Duke Johnson like that, bro. Do not do that. I'm not gonna
I'm
let you
I'm
do it.
not
I'm
saying
sorry.
talent wise. I'm saying opportunity wise, right? Because Ty Montgomery was involved in the passing game from here and there, and then if you combine him
I guess until
With Powell,
he did get hurt in the beginning of the season, so who knows? Who knows if he stayed healthy? If well, he was healthy at a certain point. I'm surprised that this is such a tangent. I'm surprised they didn't do that two running back formation that we
yeah,
saw
we
in
saw
the
it
preseason.
when went to the practice. We saw that they were doing
We
that a
did.
lot.
You remember that, right? And I'm surprised they didn't do it during the season. But anyway,
Yeah, but
like,
anyway. Point being, I think David Johnson is going to be one of those guys who's on the field 80, 75%, 80% of the snaps.
Right. And
Um,
that's a lot. So that means
that
that
is a lot.
if that's the case, like you're not getting too many guys around his price, like maybe Le'Veon, James Conner, maybe those are guys who are gonna, have that sort of role. That's what it seems like. At least Le'Veon Bell for sure. James Conner probably, maybe. So yeah. So
And also, I busted a myth here. I have a player profiler up, and they diagnosed David Johnson with a back strain in week 5 and a high ankle sprain in week 6.
right, I
So
saw that.
both.
And the guy who runs Player Profiler, like
Oh, he put a comment. He's like, I don't know.
he's very biased, when it comes to this particular topic. So I'm gonna take that one with a grain of salt. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, no, I get it, man. Like I'm not going out of my way to grab DJ,
hmm
right? But like I'm gonna consider him at like the middle to end of the third. Maybe like Le'Veon. Well, I think I'm gonna take Le'Veon Bell before David Johnson.
Yeah, me too.
Um, I think I'm gonna take and James Conner is an interesting one. I honestly think James Conner has more of a injury risk than David Johnson. So like if I'm going safer, I'll probably go DJ over James Conner. If I want to go for super upside, like top five, James Conner, just because of his damn role in that Steelers offense with Big Ben back, like he has that upside. So it's kind of what you're going for. And who have you picked in the first 2 rounds, right? Have you gone super
hmm
risky, or have you guys have solid floors where you need some upside? It depends.
Yeah, and it seems like David Johnson is just one of those guys who end up falling to me in the end of the third round, and I'm like, yeah, it's the best running back available. I'm
Yeah.
playing in a PPR league. Why not?
Oh yeah. That's a no-brainer at that point. End of the third, it's like, yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah. So another guy who usually tends to fall that late is guy Melvin Gordon. So Melvin Gordon now at the Broncos. It's kind of a confusing situation because if you look at the outside of it, you say like, okay, this Denver's been a rotation running back system for quite some time, but now they have Pat Shermer. And with Pat Shermer, he tends to only use one running back. And Melvin Gordon seems to be that guy. I mean, they paid him, I think it was like 8, 9, $10 million
Yeah.
per year. I think it was like eight, somewhere around eight. But point being, he's very capable pass catcher. He's gonna be the guy in passing downs. He's gonna be the goal line back. And I'm sure other guy like Philip Lindsay is gonna filter in the early downs, but he's there when you need the value. He's like the most valuable things for him would be the goal line work and the receiving work. So as long as he's on the field for those two things, I have him 18 just because I'm kind of unsure about the offense in general. Like at first it was really high on Drew Lock, but then I kind of looked more into it. I'm like, he's still got a lot to prove.
Would,
He
would you
went.
say that like RB18 is like his floor?
Yeah,
Pretty
I would.
much, right?
eh, I would. I want more confirmation
Yeah.
that that's what Pat Shermer's gonna do because I
Right.
don't think Philip Lindsay's gonna go down quietly,
Right.
right? Like I don't think he's
That's for
just gonna
sure.
get shoved into nothing.
Yeah.
And I don't know how efficient he's gonna be either because I think he's got like a career like 3.8, 3.7 yards per carry or something like that. So I am a little worried about his efficiency and what he does for those touches.
Right.
He seems to me from time to time that he's a high volume type of runner,
Right.
or at least at the very least a goal line runner. So
Yeah.
he'll get his opportunities, but I have questions about Drew Lock. I have questions about this offense, but he's in a really good situation. So I would say like I'd say like running back 20, 21 would be his floor, and
Right.
his ceiling could be like a top 10 guy. I mean, at the
Right.
very best. So, but you
Yeah.
need the offense to kick on all cylinders at that
That's
point.
true. I mean, they do need to take a step up, and they have the pieces like Drew Lock. You would have to think that he takes a no. You wouldn't have to think it, but you would hope that he takes a step forward,
hmm
right? And then he has a couple more weapons. A decent offensive line. They could do some things, but I like Philip Lindsay, right? I think he's talented. But I just he's just never going to be the main guy. He wants to be the main guy. A lot of Broncos fans want him to be the main guy, but he's not going to be the main guy. He's
He's got
small.
a good story.
He's
Yeah.
oh my god, his story's incredible. You know what I'm saying? But his size, unfortunately, like he's just too small. You know what I mean? Like Gordon, I think he's gonna come in, play like 60% of the snaps at the very least. Like you said, I think you nailed it perfectly. Like he'll get the goal line looks. He'll be the primary passing down back, right? In addition to whatever work he gets on early downs. I think that's where he'll be splitting work on
Mhm.
those early downs. But he's gonna get a chunk of everything, right? And that's he's gonna be the primary pass catcher, I think, primary goal line guy. And then he'll get some early down work. So I do think, from a real football sense, I do think that these two guys complement each other very well.
Mhm.
Um, but with Gordon being involved in all the phases of the game, I think he'll be a solid RB2, right? And when you look at when I say solid RB2, I always think like RB18, right? Like right in the middle. Um,
Yeah.
and when you look at Pat Shermer's history, right, he's used workhorse backs, like you said, right? His RB1s have historically had most of the work.
Yeah.
That can suggest that Gordon will get a majority of the work, especially since he's capable in all phases, and the fact that they paid him, right, as a like a legit RB1. So um, that's why his upside can be a little bit higher than we think, right? Because Pat Shermer likes that guy. So, you know, I think that there is a little bit of upside with Gordon, but his opportunity should be there. A solid RB2 at the very least, I think.
Yeah, and a guy who's not going to be in our top 35, at least for me. I think it's going to be the same for us, but Philip Lindsay is not going to touch my top 35. I mean, I just don't see a scenario where I ever draft him and I'm like, oh, like maybe Melvin Gordon gets hurt and then he plays less snaps than Royce Freeman and is a fringe running back too. Like, and you're drafting him in like the ninth, eighth, ninth round. Like, wherever his ADP is. I just don't see a scenario where Philip Lindsay is on any of my teams. I just don't see the upside he has. As the change of pace back, he had less targets than Royce Freeman. He played less snaps than Royce Freeman. And then you add another guy over him. So I just don't see a scenario where I draft him.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, the only scenario where I'll draft Philip Lindsay is if I desperately need some running back depth. That's about it. And if I'm in a situation where my flex is a little shaky or my RB2 spot is a little shaky, then I'm looking at like the ninth round. And I'm like, all right, well, what running backs are available. Um,
But
he's the
even then,
best
I'd rather
possible.
grab like an upside guy like a Zach Moss or like a Naheem Hines later
Yeah,
on.
Zach
Like
Moss is definitely somebody that should be. You should take a look at Zach Moss for sure. Now, we talked about Melvin Gordon's downside, and what his downside is that this turns into a 50-50 share,
mhm.
right? Where the difference between where Melvin Gordon is being drafted and Philip Lindsay is being drafted is actually too much of a difference.
but but I, what I would say is, would it be a 50-50 difference or would it be a 33-33-33? Because I just talked about before how, for whatever reason, Royce Freeman had more snaps than Philip Lindsay and he had more targets than
Well,
Philip.
if you looked at last year, Philip Lindsay was the better player on the field, and
He
then there
was.
there became a point in there was a point in the season where they gave the reins to Philip Lindsay. Philip Lindsay was the guy who was getting much more snaps. So I'm gonna look at Philip Lindsay's snap count, and there's a point where Philip Lindsay just kind of takes over a little bit. Um, since we're on the topic, and I'm not gonna let it go. So. Um,
That's why we're here.
Right. So like he didn't reach 50% of snaps until week 10. And then after week 10, he was over 50% of snaps one, two, three, four, five of the last 7 games. And in those games, he had an increase. His work increased a ton. So his work went up to he was averaging let's see, 17 touches per game,
Okay.
opposed to the earlier part of the season where it was a little less than that. And Royce Freeman wasn't averaging as much. So let's see. Royce Freeman was doing around that same spot. So, and it wasn't because of an injury to Royce Freeman or anything like that. It was just more like we
Not playing
thought,
as
what
well.
I thought it was going to be was the changing of the guard, right?
Hmm.
And Royce Freeman ended up not having more than 8 carries in any game or 9 carries in any game after week 8. So
Yeah.
he was averaging, let's see, he was averaging 14 touches per game, 14.3 touches per game from weeks 1 through 8. And then after that, from week 9 and on, he was averaging 7.6 touches a game. So there was a clear changing of the guard there, where they were like, all right, well, Phil Lindsay is the more dominant guy, and he was playing a lot better than Royce Freeman was in the beginning part of the year, and they made a shift. So I do think that like this is not going to be a situation where you're taking Lindsay off the field, or you're taking Melvin Gordon off the field for Royce Freeman. Royce
Mm,
Freeman, unfortunately, I think he's the forgotten man in this scenario. Now, if Gordon were to go down, I do think this becomes another timeshare, right? Like I don't think
yeah.
Lindsay is going to be like the handcuff to Melvin Gordon. I do think he might become the 1A, but that split will be even closer than whatever split Melvin Gordon.
Yeah.
I love
That's
this
so
rabbit
funny.
hole that we just went through. Like has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but like it's
We
still.
got 15 more running backs to talk about.
All right, let's do it, man. Don't worry, guys. This podcast will only be 2 hours long. It's all good.
It probably will, but you know what? That's fine. I love it. I love talking about stuff like this. So next guy on the list, we got Chris Carson. So I have him a little higher than I think some other people do. A little, I don't know. Everybody's either like top 15 or like outside the top 20. So I guess I'm somewhere in the middle at 19. But he's still going to be the 1A going into the season. He managed to play, I think, most games. Did he even miss a game last year? It might have been one or two, if
I think he
anything.
did,
Might have
or
been
did
one or two. But
he played in all the games, but I think he was like banged up.
yeah, yeah, as
I think that's
usual.
what it was.
But so he's the 1A. You have Carlos Hyde's going to be that guy early on. Penny's probably going to start on the pup list, and he could come in later in the season. But when Penny does come in, this is going to be. I really think it's going to be a three-man rotation. And Carlos Hyde, he's capable of taking a lot of that early down work. You know, like they said it's going to be Chris Carson being the main guy, then Carlos Hyde, but Carlos Hyde's been consistently hurting fantasy owners for like 3 or 4 years now. I think he took a year off when he got traded from Cleveland to Jacksonville. He took the
Right.
1 year off vacation, but then he came back and stuck the thorn in our side in Houston last year. So ruined our Duke Johnson dreams. But I mean, still, like Chris Carson, he played 70% of the snaps last season, even splitting with Penny. He had the fifth most rushing yards. Yeah, I mean, there's just obviously the injury concern with Carson, as always. It's still going to be a prolific rushing offense, but it could just really get ugly when you have a guy like Penny and Carson in that same backfield. And Penny was explosive when he played last year, too. It seems like we're just waiting for that year where Penny stays on the field. It just hasn't happened. So,
Yeah, I personally would completely count out Rashad Penny for next season. See,
yeah.
the thing is, like, he's going to start on the pup list. He tore his ACL in December,
Mm,
and with that torn ACL, he had associated meniscus damage as well that he had to get repaired. And because of that, I did a little bit of research, and because of that meniscus repair, after the surgery, they can't do anything for about a month or so, at all, because the part of the surgery the part of the knee that they repair, if you kind of bend the knee in a certain way, like you're not even allowed to move because it would actually ruin the progress that you had on, because of the surgery. So
mhm.
it's one of those things where like he's gonna start on the pup list. He's probably gonna miss like at least like the first like quarter or third of the season. And when he comes back, it's gonna be really tough to say how effective he's gonna be because of that. So I'm personally like I really think this is gonna be like the Chris Carson, Carlos Hyde show next year.
And maybe DJ Dallas.
Yeah, maybe, man. um, but I think
Third
it's funny.
round.
I actually think Carlos Hyde exactly like he kind of fits what the Seahawks want to do, right? They just want to run the ball a lot, right? And
Yeah.
you saw what he did last year in Houston. Carson should still be the guy, but I can definitely see Hyde taking a lot of work or some work away from Carson, right? Giving him more of a breather than they've been able to give him last year,
Mhm.
right? They had Mike Davis in 2018 sharing the load, right? And they wanted Rashad Penny, like they let Mike Davis go, and they wanted Rashad Penny to be
To be
that
that
guy in
guy.
2019, but that didn't work out, right?
Nope.
Um, Carson banged up, like it seems like every year. Obviously, his running style contributes to that. And then the fumbles last year, like that was like a real issue at some point. Where Pete
Yeah.
Carroll, the only reason why he wasn't taken off the field was Pete Carroll loves the guy. He was just like, nope, that's my guy. That's my guy. Like I don't care. He can fumble every game. It's fine. No problem. Average a fumble a game. That's cool. Um, but like I think taking away a little bit of work from him might make him more efficient. Like it might be something they just try this year. So Carlos Hyde himself isn't amazing, but he's solid, and that's all the Seahawks need for their style of offense. I think, where he's going, Carson is appropriate right before that like slight tier gap, right? John
Hmm.
Taylor, Mark Ingram, Montgomery, Singletary. So if you're hard pressed for an RB2 near the 3-4 turn, I think Carson might be like that last one that
Hmm.
you can have some confidence in.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, your question now, if Carson were to get hurt, I think Hyde can become very fantasy relevant, and there is risk with Carson injury wise this year, along with all the fumbles he had last year. So if you're drafting, let's say you have a deeper bench, because I know you don't like to handcuff, but if you had a deeper bench, would you consider drafting Carlos Hyde late?
Yeah, I definitely would, especially because with COVID as well, one of the things they just released is that if a player gets COVID, they go on a 3 week IR. And then after that, I'm assuming they're going to have to get back into football shape or whatever from taking 3 weeks off. So it could be like a 4 or 5 week type thing before a player's back on the field. So, yeah, I mean, even in that situation, like Carlos Hyde's a 5 week running back one. And then that's not even including any potential injuries to Chris Carson, which he's had over the years. So, yeah, I mean, Carlos Hyde definitely has value as a handcuff.
Yeah, don't be
Depending
putting that
on
COVID
when
on people, man.
sorry,
Don't be
I
putting
had
that
to
COVID on people,
I had to
bro.
bring that up. I try to go each one without bringing it up, but I had to bring it up once.
Bro,
But
I'm knocking on wood right now. If Chris Carson gets that COVID, bro, I'm
it's not my fault. I didn't draft him. I didn't draft him. It's all good. No, we don't wish COVID on anyone. Just public
Okay,
service.
we don't wish COVID on our worst enemies.
No, not
Actually,
at all.
maybe one or two people, but no, I'm kidding. That was joking.
Okay, we had to say it. um, so another guy we talked about this guy last podcast. So if there's anything you want to add, we kind of talked about him at the end a little bit. Leonard Fournette. I have him really low, right? I have him at 20.
20? That's not that low.
I mean, a lot of people. He's being taken at the second round. So
Is
to
he?
have him, oh
What is
yeah,
he? I didn't realize. I didn't realize how high his ADP was because I never even look at him. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, his ADP on Fantasy Football Calculator is third round, top of third.
really?
Yeah.
They changed it up though. They just take it from the actual site, and I don't think anybody mock drafts on Fantasy Calculator now.
No, they do. There was like 1,500 mock drafts between the last 2 days. So
Oh,
people.
there you go.
The thing was with like, it's fine. I mean, this is how they always did it, really.
Yeah,
Nothing really changed. But
but point
But yeah,
being,
no, I have seen mock drafts though where people have drafted Fournette in the second round, and I think a lot of it has to do with what he did last year and his opportunity last year.
issue. I hit the mic real quick, but we should be good. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's all good. It's all good. Did you hear what I said about Fournette?
Yep.
About like people like just drafted him because of what he did last year and his opportunity last year.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it too is that he had a low touchdown number. So and he was still among the top running backs. So if with any improvement to the rushing touchdown category, if he gets 6 instead of 3, he could be propelled into a top 5 running back. But his passing work is going to get chopped up. The team hates him. He could be traded midseason to a crappy situation.
Hey
So
man, what about Jay Gruden? Like, is he gonna like? There's a
so
lot of shit coming on like about Jay Gruden, like with this all this Redskins stuff coming out. So I'm very curious to see like what happens if he gets any discipline.
from
Some
what I've
investigation.
seen, from everything I've seen so far, nobody has named Jay Gruden in any part of it
Officially?
officially. There's been allegations,
Right.
but I've seen people talking about it on Twitter. They're saying nobody like Jay Gruden hasn't been named in anything so far. So I don't want to say that's 100% true,
Gotcha.
but because it could change in the future if people step forward, whatever. But
So you're saying
Jay,
all the stuff that I read about Jay Gruden today?
I read so much stuff about all the players. Do you see the thing about Capri Bibbs?
Yeah, I heard about the Capri
Yeah,
Bibb
it's
thing, but it's
nuts.
apparently
So
that I think has been debunked. I think
yeah,
that one's not true because he didn't get cut that game. Basically, okay, everyone's wondering what the hell we're talking about. So basically, And we'll just talk about the Capri Bibbs thing and not about all the other shit that Jay Gruden is
Yeah.
accused of by all these random people. Um, but the Capri Bibbs thing was like, all right, well, actually, this kind of gets into some crazy stuff too. But for some off the football reasons, off the football field reasons, Jay Gruden cut Capri Bibbs allegedly,
He
and
wasn't cut. He was benched for Byron Marshall.
was it Byron Marshall who was the guy who? Okay, well, it was
It
Byron
was
Marshall,
Byron Marshall,
and then Byron Marshall came in and whiffed on a block.
which resulted in Alex Smith's injury.
Right. So, but apparently that's been debunked, so I when I first saw that, I was just like, no way, that's crazy. But it doesn't look like that's what happened here. Hopefully not. We'll see. I'm still gonna look into this shit. I'm gonna go to TMZ.com as soon as this is over.
And for anyone wondering why we're bringing this up and why it's important to Leonard Fournette's value is because Jay Gruden's guy, Chris Thompson, is the guy that we're projecting to take all, if not most, of his passing down work. So if you're wondering why this is somehow all connected, even though it's kind of, I don't know,
Right.
some crazy shit went down today. So
Right.
I'm gonna say about that.
But yeah, I mean,
So
he had a shit ton of opportunity last year. Fournette, right? Played on more than 90% of snaps on all three downs,
mm,
right? A lot of that had to do with John DeFilippo being there last year. Like he's a guy who likes to bring in a pass heavy offense, and on top of that, um, you had what's his name, Doug Marone calling Leonard Fournette his bell cow every down back
yep.
before the season started. So like the information was there for us last year, which is part of the reason why a lot of us loved him at a cheaper price than being drafted this year.
And he did
Right?
play 16 games.
Yeah, and it was great, and it worked out. So Chris Thompson, like the fact that he can't stay healthy, which is kind of true. Like he will be the third down and passing down guy until that happens. Um, he was only behind Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler in receptions before he got hurt last year. After a few weeks. So,
Yeah.
they had early down guys like Adrian Peterson, Darius Geis, while that was happening. So, this team's going to be losing a lot, right? And I think Thompson's going to be on the field a lot because of that. So, I would love to hear some news where Gruden says that Fournette is their third down guy, and he might not be, he might be, but he did catch a ton of passes last year. He was not efficient, right? He was averaging 3 receptions per game before last year, right? 65% of snaps or so. So, yeah, so like if he can add like 3 receptions per game on top of like 15 to 20 carries, that's legit. Like I would be happy with that.
Yeah.
But the only thing is none of Gruden's early down running backs over the past several years even got that. So, I don't know. There's just guys around around his ADP. Like I just much rather have. Like their roles are more defined.
Exactly. We named some guys already, but
Exactly.
what about
And,
James
and these
Conner?
guys, like the ones we talked about, are going after Leonard Fournette.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of them being James Conner. Are you buying into James Conner this season?
Like I said earlier, like it's really about the upside, right?
Upside.
You just see me just knocking my mic just now.
So
Connor, like
excited.
I think him being taken this late, like
Mhm.
people only taking him this late is because of his health, right? Like if he can stay healthy, he can be a steal. Steelers running backs are gold. He was
Speaking of
gold.
his health, do
Yeah.
you know what injuries he played through last year? Because I have
Uh,
it here.
yeah. Go ahead. Go for it.
So he played through a knee sprain, an ankle sprain, a quad strain, an AC joint sprain, and a quad contusion.
Amazing.
So he played through 5 injuries last year. In the games he played, he had 14.6 points per game. But if you take out the 2 games where he played, I think it was less than 20% of the snaps because he got injured right away. So if you take away those 2 games, he had 17.5 points per game, which would have put him as the running back 9 in
Mm.
points per game last year. So even
And that
through
was without him playing in a workhorse role.
yeah, so and some of the I think one of those injuries came in preseason. So he was playing through a lot, if not most of those injuries as the season went on. And then on top of that, they didn't really have much of a passing game at all. There was other running backs being used, and I think they just lost their O-line coach the year before, so they didn't, they had some other guys filter in, but that's pretty good for his situation. And then they did lose Ramon Foster. I think he retired this offseason. There's increased competition. We talk about Anthony McFarland as a guy we like late when we're doing mocks and stuff like that. So, but there's nothing. there's nothing before last season that would suggest James Conner is quote unquote injury prone, right? So the year prior to last year, I believe he had an ankle sprain, which happens. It was one ankle sprain. And the year before that, he had a concussion, two totally unrelated injuries. So as far as his injury history, obviously he had a mess of injuries last year, but prior to that, there's nothing to really suggest that he's an injury prone type guy. And nothing about last year. I mean, obviously he had knee sprain, ankle, quad. So quad twice. He got hit with the quad twice, but the second one was contusion, which is basically just a bruise. A bigger bruise, obviously. But point being, I don't think any of this suggests he's necessarily injury prone. Although one of the things I'm sure you'll talk about too is if he does get injured, a guy like Anthony McFarland could easily come in, steal the show, and become the new guy. I don't think they're tied or bound to James Conner by any means. And I think Mike Tomlin even talked about like if Conner were to go down, they would give the role to a guy like Benny Snell, and he'd do just fine in his replacement. So, and I think they drafted Anthony McFarland for a reason in case James Conner can't stay on the field. So they have doubts.
Right, right. Dr. Anthony Porras, who works for fantasypoints.com, I read a lot of his stuff, which is
Mm-hmm.
interesting. He goes through a lot of these players, and one concern that he has with James Conner specifically is he couldn't finish games due to contact injuries, right? That had to do with connective tissue, right? And this is way above our pay grade. Like we have no idea what the hell this means, but like
Connective tissue.
connective tissue means basically not muscle or tendon, right? It
Okay.
means like joints, ligaments, your labrum, like in your shoulder, that sort of thing, right?
Sure.
So the number of games that he finished in his career, 13, 12, and 9, right? In those 3 seasons. So he couldn't finish games, right? In 2017, he had a surgery on his MCL, right? And he made a point where, do you know what percentage of players who have an MCL sprain actually have surgery? 5%. You
Interesting.
know, and there was actually like and then last year he had the AC sprain in his shoulder, right? And that can actually reoccur as well.
Interesting.
And you know what he was suggesting? He was suggesting that his cancer treatment could have affected his body in a way where his connective tissue just isn't the same as everybody else, which is like such a huge stretch. Like when
Mm-hmm.
I hear that, I'm just like, wow, like that's some really like serious stuff right there. But it's super interesting in any case, whether like this makes me like him or not for fantasy. Like I just thought it was super interesting. Um, but
Interesting.
I think there are reasons to think that like he can potentially get hurt again, like especially
Mm-hmm.
because of the AC sprain too. And we know that like the AC sprain, I think is like one of the most common injuries for a running back, just because of how much how much getting a hit like in that shoulder. Um,
Yeah.
but like I said, like he is going to be a guy who, if he's healthy, like he has super high upside. Last year they experimented with a shared backfield approach, and that just didn't work. Mike Tomlin acknowledged that, right? He said in May that he just wants to go back to the featured running back role. That's the guy to find rhythm, and he said that Connor is his guy. And this role, like if you're not aware, it's well documented. This role with Tomlin has gone before Le'Veon Bell, right?
Yeah.
From Willie Parker, Rashard Mendenhall, to Le'Veon Bell, to D'Angelo Williams when Bell couldn't play, to 2018 Connor when he took over for Le'Veon Bell when he held out, right?
Yep.
He views his other backs, and he said this in the same comments. He views his other backs as supplementing the main running back if he misses time, right? And I think Connor will have a short leash though, like you said, if he gets hurt again, because he wouldn't be able to stay healthy. Like this will be his fourth year, and because him in and out of the lineup, it will cause this discontinuity. And I think that starting, they're going to start exploring those options, right? Benny Snell, fourth round rookie Anthony McFarland, taking Connor's spot potentially. I think McFarland is the more versatile, dynamic of the two guys, but it seems as though Snell might have the upper hand right now as
Mm-hmm.
Connor's backup. Mainly because of COVID, that sort of thing. But I'll say this: like Connor has a ton of upside for where he's going. But the fact that he has such an issue finishing games over his career, that might be an issue, right? And it's not trending upwards either, right? It's trending downwards. Like the amount of games that he missed was 13, 12, and then last year was 9, right? Um, so, it's going to be interesting. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if he hurts his shoulder again if he gets another big workload. And it seems like he's in line for another big workload, right? And if he
Yeah.
doesn't get a if he doesn't get a big workload, then he might stay healthier, but at the same time, he might disappoint you if he doesn't get that big workload. But you said that even last year, he was still the RB9 if you didn't count the games that he played a ridiculously low amount of snaps.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he wasn't playing like 80% of snaps. He averaged around like maybe like 50 to 60% of snaps last
Yeah, I
year.
was looking at it, it was like 50, 60.
Hmm.
Um, what's even more interesting about that, right? That quote from Mike Tomlin, knowing he has the guys behind Connor, maybe he's not like we talked about before. We talked about Chris Carson being able to preserve him with having a guy like Carlos Hyde there, or even Todd Gurley being in Atlanta to a point where the team doesn't revolve around him, so they don't have to view him as an every down type guy. But with James Conner, maybe Mike Tomlin's in the sense of like, we're just going to run him. If he gets hurt, we have other guys. Like, we're not
Right.
trying to preserve him by any means. So I guess when you take that sort of mentality, it does make you much more cautious drafting a guy like James Conner in like the third round because the team's not they don't view they kind of it makes it seem like he's kind of like replaceable,
Yeah, he's expendable. Yeah.
expendable.
Right.
So if anything, that is cause for concern with Connor. If he's on the field, and like you said, he can't finish games, so I don't know. It's tricky. I think he's still got the upside. If you can get him in like the fourth round, which I've seen him go, like tail end of the third, beginning of the fourth, it's happened. So not bad value. But then there's this other guy here, David Montgomery, who's going right next to him. If anything, usually right behind him. He's had no improvement in talking about David Montgomery now, but he hasn't had any improvements to his offensive line. I think if anything, they lost Kyle Long, right? Um, they added Nick Foles, who was really their only acquisition if you don't count Ted Ginn and Jimmy Graham, who can't block, or whatever the hell they added at tight end. I don't fucking know what they did in that position. But yeah, I mean, Foles, he doesn't really do all that much. Like, I guess it keeps the best quarterback in the game. I talked about this with Allen Robinson when we did the wide receiver episode, but it keeps the best quarterback in the game. So whether it's Foles being better than Trubisky or Foles pushing Trubisky to be a better quarterback, we're going to have the better quarterback on the field at all times, which is good. It helps Dave Montgomery in that sense. And another thing with Dave Montgomery is he's a lock for like 250 plus touches at least. I mean, I think he had 240 carries last year, and you kind of have to take away that first one or two games with Mike Davis being involved. So
Right.
he's gonna see a decent workload, and I think this is an offense that wants to lean on him. He's got a lot of room to grow, and if Matt Nagy can calm down his play calling a little bit, if he can stop trying to be so damn creative and just be simple, get the job done, whatever it is.
Can we get some like
They,
outside zone runs or something like that? Like I feel
yeah,
like
it's
everything
like
is
some
between the center and the guard.
exactly. And there was so much talk last year about how we view David Montgomery as the Kareem Hunt of this team. Like
Yeah.
I remember when that came out and his fucking draft value went all the way up.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, sky's the limit for this guy. Even in a shitty offense, I could see him being a low end running back one if all goes well. Like if they give to a point where they have the quarterback play improves and they get more creative with their play calling, maybe he gets a little more involved in the passing game. He could definitely finish as low end at running back one, but I think he's a really good running back three. He's the kind of guy I would if you went anything but a running back in the first three rounds, I think David Montgomery is a guy to look for as your running back three if you're coming into that fourth round. So
Yeah, I agree. I personally would not be comfortable with him as my RB2. Like if I do a draft and I give Montgomery's my RB2, I failed. Yeah, that's really how I look at it. I think RB3 and below is good because of the volume, right? And then the upside can be there because of that volume. And like you said, nothing really changed for him this year, outside the potential QB change, right? I think a switch to Nick Foles is going to be a positive for the offense overall, but I don't know how much that's going to affect Montgomery. He already had 14 carries inside the 5 last year, which was 3 away from the lead league. His offensive line hasn't changed. He still has. It might have even lost a guy, and it's still, he still has Tariq Cohen as the main pass catcher out of the backfield.
Yeah.
Um, and his volume on a per game basis was all over the place last year. You know what I mean? It was super inconsistent, and not sure why would we assume that we would find more consistency on a game to game basis? That's the biggest problem that I had with Montgomery last year.
Yeah.
And where he's going, I think like we said, the case is that he's going to have volume. No other back will likely get his type of volume like around that spot, right? But I think guys like Jonathan Taylor, Mark Ingram, Devin Singletary, and especially Kareem Hunt, I think they all have more upside than him, right? And just because of the offense he's on, and just because of his situation, I think
I would say they have similar upside, but it's
yeah.
just it's much more of a stretch for David Montgomery to reach that upside.
Oh yeah. So when I talk about David Montgomery, like I like David Montgomery a lot as a player,
Hmm.
right? You know what I'm saying? Like I like so when I talk about these running backs, it's more about like the running back plus the situation they're in. Like I like him a lot. Like if David Montgomery was on a good team, like dude would be like a baller, bro. Like he would be so good. And I think he's a good player. He's patient. He's capable in the pass game. He's a good blocker too. And I think he would be really good in another offense. But yeah, I don't know, man. Like I just think that even a guy like Cam Akers, like I might rather have him because I think he has a better chance of being more involved in the pass game than Montgomery does. I'm passing on Montgomery this year unless he falls another round. And like I desperately need running back depth because like I went wide receiver and tight end earlier than I wanted to,
Hmm.
right? And then I need a guy. I'm like, all right, well Montgomery's going to get volume, so I'm going to chase the volume and I'm going to draft him as my RB3 flex option.
So to sum up, I'd rather pass on Monty in the fourth and get Kareem Hunt in the fifth.
Yes,
Love it.
in full PPR. Yes,
Yeah, we'll be fair.
in a
Um,
half PPR, well maybe half PPR still rather, but like I think, and also by the
standard.
way, like when you look at Kareem Hunt, like just to talk about it, if you look at Kareem Hunt versus David Montgomery, I think Kareem Hunt poses more risk than David Montgomery because we don't know what the split's going to look like between Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. We just don't know. We're projecting, right? With David
Mhm.
Montgomery, you know that he's going to get 250 touches if he stays healthy.
So
You know what I mean?
since we're on the topic, why don't we just we'll just talk about Kareem Hunt here. So
Sure.
we'll skip a couple spots. So I have David Montgomery 22. We're skipping down to 26 is my Kareem Hunt's my RB 26. He had 45 targets in 8 games last year. So obviously 8 games is half the season. He would have finished with 90 targets, which I believe would have been fourth or fifth out of all running backs. Um, at the same time, in those 8 games, 6 of those games he finished with more fantasy points than Nick Chubb, right? And that first 6 games, he was incredibly efficient. He had 14.5 points per game. The last 2 games the Browns played, they just kind of fell apart. Both Nick Chubb and Hunt in those last 2 weeks couldn't get over 10 points. It was just a mess in those last 2 games. So I don't even know if I want to count those last 2 games. But when they were rolling, when Kareem Hunt first got on the team after suspension, after not being in the game plan early on in the season for a whole 8 games, he came in and averaged 14.5 points per game in that first 6 span. So that was great. And I mean, he had more snaps than like on average per game basis. He had more snaps than Joe Mixon, David Montgomery, Austin Eckler, Josh Jacobs, and Miles Sanders. So these are all guys being drafted ahead of him, and Kareem Hunt was on the field more of all like for more time than all of those guys, and he had 14.5 points per game. So we talk about a true Alvin Kamara, Mark Ingram situation from a couple years ago. This could really be it. There could realistically be 2 running back 1s, or at least a running back 1 and a running back 2 in this offense. And I have no problem taking Kareem Hunt. I think Kareem Hunt's a great running back 3, like we talked about with Dave Montgomery. And at the same time, like I, it sounds weird because I have Dave Montgomery higher, but I swear it's only because of the volume, right? But like at the same time, you got to do a weighted opportunity like the last 8 weeks or some shit like that. I swear Kareem Hunt's gonna be way up there.
Oh yeah, he is.
But He is. Oh, you have
Yep,
him on there
yep. He's higher
on a
than
per
Chubb.
game basis, higher than Chubb.
Yep. In a full PPR league, he has a higher weighted opportunity than Chubb because of all his targets. But Joey, remember, I see your face right now. But remember, this is based on last year, and last year there was a different coach in town, right? And things, we have to put it in a little perspective, and we have to take that with a grain of salt.
I got
We,
too
we want
excited.
to we want to assume that things are going to work out how we want it to work out.
Hmm.
And that being said, like Kareem Hunt is one of my favorite targets, right? Like I'm aiming for him to be my RB3 or flex in PPR leagues, and I do think that's gonna give me a huge advantage. Um, Now I don't think this was an error on the part of Pro Football Reference, but I need you to check out this stat on Nick Chubb. He was
Okay.
the most unlucky goal line running back last year, even unluckier than Leonard Fournette. Are you ready? He
Okay.
was third in attempts inside the 5 with 15. Guess how many he scored on?
What was it?
15,
Six?
15 attempts inside the 5. How many did he score on?
Was it one?
Two.
Two.
Out of 15 attempts inside the 5, he scored on two.
Nice.
Guess how many yards he had on those 15 carries?
Negative something.
Negative 14.
Nice,
No
dude.
other running back had negative rushing yards inside the 15. I'm sorry, inside the 5.
I think I remember seeing the stats somewhere. I
That
just
is
forgot the
ridiculous.
numbers.
Like I was looking at profile. I was put while I was doing research for this podcast. I was looking. I was like, is that right? Like that's crazy. But yeah, I mean, like so. But Chubb still had 8 touchdowns last year, right?
Yeah.
Rushing touchdowns. So
Imagine if he had 15 more.
I right. Exactly. I think like that's probably part of the reason why Kareem Hunt outscored Chubb in 6 of those 8 games after
Yep.
Hunt returned last year, in PPR leagues, by the way. But still, Hunt has been efficient, like you said, in the passing game his whole career. He averaged 5.5 targets per game last year. Was on the field for more than 50% of snaps. For me, I think keeping Hunt off the field, and we're talking about this new change, right, to this new coaching regime, right? Kevin Stefanski coming in now. We know it's going to be run heavy, right? But for me, like you obviously have Nick Chubb, I think one of the maybe a top 3 rusher in the league, maybe.
Mhm.
Um, I think keeping Hunt off the field though is just it would be irresponsible, right? The talent leaps off the
Yep.
page with him, right? I do think that this will be a committee, right? Is there a chance that Chubb is the guy? Yes, there is a chance. There is a world where that's the case. But who knows what Kevin Stefanski has plans for? I think a 1-2 punch makes a lot of sense,
Hmm.
right? In weeks 10 to 17 last year, Hunt was the RB17 in PPR. And it's not like he scored a shit ton of touchdowns or anything that would inflate that, right? He was a solid RB2, and he's being drafted as the RB26, right? Like I don't see a world where like he's gonna score less than the RB26 for you. And Nick Chubb is being drafted as the RB8. So, like, is there that much of a gap between these two guys in PPR production this year? I don't know, right? And this is why I'm aiming for Hunt. I do think both are talented enough to be any team's workhorse back. And since they have two guys, I think both will be used to simply make their offense more dynamic. Now, like I said, there's that risk that Kevin Stefanski goes all in on Nick Chubb, and he's that good. So I wouldn't blame him. But it's not like there's a non-zero chance that Hunt, is worthless. Unless Chubb gets hurt or something, I wouldn't bet that happens. But I think that this is going to be a much closer share than their draft capital suggests.
Yeah, and at the same time, Alexander Madison, I was just looking, he had almost 500 rushing yards last year as a backup, and that's not even including the games where Dalvin went down because then it was all Mike Boone and Amir Abdullah because Alexander Madison wasn't available. So Alexander Madison, I think playing 12 games in a backup role, had almost 500 yards on the ground.
Right.
And with a guy like Kareem Hunt, we're talking about his potential. They say they might play him as a wide receiver 3 type guy.
Right.
There was a report that came out that said behind OBJ and Jarvis Landry that Kareem Hunt would be that next guy up, which is really interesting too because I mean it makes sense. They want to get him in. That's telling me they really want to get him involved in the offense, but they want Nick Chubb to be the main rushing guy.
Right.
Interestingly enough, Jarvis Landry is coming off hip surgery. He may not be ready for the start of the season. If Jarvis Landry is on the pup list and misses 6 weeks, maybe Kareem Hunt has a huge passing. I mean, he could have a huge
Oh,
passing down role
I would
early
be
on.
I would be so in on Hunt if that's the case. 100%.
And from everything I've seen with Jarvis Landry, that's a very, very good possibility that Jarvis Landry misses the first half of the season. Not first half, the first 6 games. I'm sorry.
Wow, wow, that's interesting. That's a really interesting nugget right there. But yeah, no, I think and it's funny. Like when you bring up Madison, Madison was just a rookie last year. He
Yep.
wasn't an established guy. Kareem Hunt is a very established player, right? Obviously, the sky was a limit for him, but he took a big step back because of his off the field issues, right? He was a very established player,
Yep.
and we know what his talent is in the pros. Alexander, we can't say the same thing about Alexander Madison. So the fact that he was willing to have Madison on the field tells you a lot, right? And he's not, I don't think he's gonna as talented as Dalvin Cook is, he still wasn't willing to just like have Dalvin Cook, on the off the field a ton, on the field like 100% of the time. Although he did have his fair share of injuries, so that could have played a big role in all that. But at the same time, I do think that these two guys, like the difference between them from a production standpoint, there's no reason to have one guy play way more over the other.
And another thing too, if you talk about I know we're going about Kareem Hunt for a while, but we got a
I
lot of
think
good
it's
stuff here.
important though.
It's
I
great.
think he's an important guy to talk about because it's this not we're not just talking about Kareem Hunt here. We're hitting a lot of draft strategy, right? We're hitting the
Yep.
fact that like, hey, like you can be looking at Nick Chubb in the first, you can be looking at Kareem Hunt the fifth, and maybe it's smarter to go after another guy, like the second guy. That's all.
Yeah, and another thing about Hunt, we've talked about his pass catching ability, but one thing we haven't talked about is his rushing ability. Because if you talk about like some of the most prolific pass catching, like I'll say like mainly pass catching guys, like
Yeah,
Austin Eckler, James White, Tariq Cohen, like that type of player. What
right.
separates a guy like Hunt is his ability as a runner.
Yeah,
Like if you put Kareem Hunt, if you put Kareem Hunt, if you traded Austin Eckler and Kareem Hunt, just imagine Kareem Hunt would be a top 5 running back easily
right.
with all that rushing opportunity, all that passing opportunity. And Austin, it's funny. I just thought about that. Austin Eckler would fit so perfectly into that if they just swapped. They should talk to each other. They should try to figure that out because
Yeah,
that would be perfect.
that
Okay,
would be perfect, dude.
a little off topic, but
That, I
yeah,
like the trade idea right there.
don't don't undermine Kareem Hunt's passing ability. I mean, ability as a
His,
runner. I'm sorry,
his rush ability. Yep.
not passing ability. He can't play quarterback yet, as far as we know. So a couple more guys. We hit the hour mark, and we have one, two, three. We have a lot of guys to go through. So
Maybe we have
let's
to
try
split
to.
this in half here. Goodness.
We may have to
You know
do
what it
part
is? I
three.
think we like talking about these guys. I think we like talking football. I think that's the problem.
Yeah, and I don't want to take like if we're. I don't want to. I don't want. I'm not the kind of person. You're not the kind of person either who to like rush it. You
Right.
know, like I don't want to skip over important points because we want enough time to fit everybody else. So.
Exactly.
So next guy, we'll see how many more we can fit. Devin Singletary. I have him as my running back 23. He's expected to be the running back 1A, which he was towards the end of the season. And it's funny, if you look at like the snaps he played, and you just wouldn't believe it that he actually played 67.8% of the snaps. And we talked about guys like David Montgomery playing less than that. When you look at Devin Singletary, you don't exactly see him as a workhorse, but he kind of played that role towards the end of the year.
He did.
And it's interesting to see they said Zach Moss, the guy they drafted, they want him to play a similar role to what Frank Gore played last year. So, but when? Right? Is it early Frank Gore or is it late Frank Gore? Because if it's late Frank Gore, Devin Singletary is going to be a huge value in the fourth, fifth round. But if we're talking about early Frank Gore, which I think is the more likely case, then Devin Singletary, even as the one, I don't know how much touchdown opportunity a guy like Devin Singletary is going to get. He's
Right.
not going to get all that much on the ground between Josh Allen and Zach Moss. He's behind a meh offensive line, but he is like the definition of just he'll take any touch for like 10 yards. I think in the first 2 weeks he played, I think he was averaging 10 yards a touch.
He
So
looked good, man. He was a rookie. Like I was at that Jets game, that first Jets Bills game.
yeah,
I feel like he was in the second half. He was so involved in the pass game. I was like, dude, like I'm in the Jets game. Like at these games, like there's no service. You're like trying to like take a look at these guys like on fantasy. And like, is this guy on anybody's team right now? Because I'm about to pick him up.
sitting over his bench. But Yeah, I mean, I think there's value to be had as a running back three, but in his floor, where would you put his floor? I mean, I think around like in the late 20s, he could be
Yeah,
like a low end running back three at worst. Ceiling wise, I think his ceiling's also capped, maybe like a high running back two, if
I would
anything.
say I would say like his ceiling is his floor is low is higher than low in RB3, man. Like just because of how involved that he's probably going to be in the passing game, you know.
Or what? But I mean, Zach Moss is also a capable pass
He
catcher
is.
too.
He is. He is. And it's interesting because like both of these guys, and it's interesting that they said that, oh, they want to put him in the Frank Gore role because I'm like, this guy is nothing like Frank Gore. Like they're different type of running backs. So I
Yeah,
didn't really understand that. Well, I think what they meant by that was like
complimentary.
he's going to be Devin Singletary's complement. Like that's kind of what that meant. Um, but yeah, no, so Singletary like he was awesome, right? Last year as a rookie, I think he was great. He was playing a ton of snaps. He was very involved in the passing game. He had 6 games with 4 more targets last season. And I was honestly ready to pay up for him this year. You know what I'm saying? But then the Bills had to go and draft Zach Moss. And I think Singletary will probably still be the main pass catching option. But Moss is also sneaky good in the receiving game as well. So he didn't get a ton of volume in college, right? Zach Moss, as far as like the passing game goes, but he was very efficient. He had the best yards per route run of any running back in this class. And when you look
Crazy
at
efficient.
yeah, and when you look at whether volume or efficiency in the receiving game has been more important correlating success at the next level, as far as the receiving game goes, it's actually been efficiency, right? And that's how, if you looked at Alvin Kamara in college, he got a good volume for a college running back. But if you looked at his efficiency, you're like, oh, okay, he can do some things in the NFL. And if you saw that, and then you saw what offense he went to, you're like, okay, that adds up,
Yeah.
right? Um, so anyway, so Zach Moss, he checks that box. So it'll be interesting to see how their roles line up. And that Frank Gore role that the reports came out about, mostly early down, mostly goal line, and that would be fine. But he had a ton of forced missed tackles as well. Zach Moss did, like historically good. Like when you look at the
Yeah.
numbers. Um, so his yards after contact per attempt also have been ridiculous as well. So there's some serious upside with Moss, and I think he's a little underrated. Which is why now I'm going to temper my expectations with Singletary. In a PPR league, he can provide standalone value, but I think if either gets hurt, like the other can be a RB1. And we
I
saw
think.
that their coaches
Mhm.
were willing to like have their guys play like 80% of snaps. Singletary was playing like 80% of snaps in a bunch of games last year.
Yeah, and I mean the thing with Singletary is like where is he gonna find his value? Like as a pass catcher, now they have Diggs, they have Will Beasley who's on a ton of targets in the middle last year, they have John Brown. That it's not really a passing team when you look at it from the outside. And then you look at the early down work, sure, he'll be more efficient with the work he gets, but then Zach Moss is probably more of a guy who can carry that heavy load if need be. And then you say, okay, maybe, end zone, goal line. But no, that's probably going to be Josh Allen, and it'll probably
Right.
be Zach Moss. So,
It's going to be tricky with this backfield. That's what it feels
yeah,
like to me. And I don't know if you're going to be happy spending like what is his price? Fifth round?
fourth, fifth. I'd
Yeah,
assume the
that's a
fifth.
little. That's a little. Yeah, last pick of the. No, like right near the end of the fourth round. So, yeah, a little bit expensive for me, man.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to move him down after we talked about him a little bit.
Like
That
he's
always
going like
happens to me.
6 spots ahead of. He's like the running back being taken before Kareem Hunt, and we just talked about a love affair with Kareem Hunt. Oh, by the way, going back to Kareem Hunt for a second, right? In 2000,
Uh,
and you talked about his rushing game. In 2017, his rookie year when he broke out, um, he
didn't he
had
lead the league?
yeah, he killed it, right? But his yards his yards after contact per attempt was one, two, three, four, five, sixth in the league. Um, and that was like behind guys like LeGarrette Blunt, who was first that year, right?
Yeah,
Because he's just a big bruiser. Derrick Henry, Deion Lewis, Marshawn Lynch, Mark Ingram, and Kareem Hunt.
I love
Um,
putting Dion Lewis on that list.
Dude, Deion Lewis when he joined Tennessee, it was amazing because like the amount of yards after contact was like so crazy for a guy his size, but he just knew how to avoid tackles.
He's
And then
one
he
of the
got to
most
Tennessee
elusive
and then
running
he
backs.
forgot how to do it.
Yeah, one of the most elusive guys in the league.
Right. Anyway.
Anyway, so a guy we touched on a little bit earlier, Jonathan Taylor. I have him at 24. Um, Now I have him at 23. I just moved Singletary down in my mind. But so Jonathan Taylor, well, Jonathan Taylor, Mark Ingram. I'm going to pair these two guys up here because
Sure.
it's funny. I think I don't know if we talked about this in the mock. I feel like I've said this before when I was deciding about who I wanted on my team, and I talked about how Jonathan Taylor is going to be that second half guy. He's going to be that second half guy in the year who can win you your league with what he does in the second half as he becomes more acclimated to the offense. Mark Ingram is going to be that early guy who in the first half of the season is going to score more and then kind of fiddle out a little bit as J.K. Dobbins sees an increased role. So they're both going pretty similar to each other around the same time. So it's really about what you want. And I don't know why you wouldn't want that late round guy. I don't know why you wouldn't want a Jonathan Taylor, someone who's going to go off in the second half of the year. But I do have some issues with Jonathan Taylor. And none of it, by the way, is as a runner. I think he's going to get over 5 yards carry with that offensive line easily. He's a beast of a runner. I don't have any problems with him as a runner. As a pass catcher, he had 9 drops on 50 catchable targets. He's been a little inconsistent in that sense. I think he had 20 or something catches in his last year. He had 8 catches the 2 years before, even after seeing such a crazy workload um, as a runner all 3 years. So on top, he's not a great pass catcher. He's a capable one, but he's not a consistent one. And then on top of that, Marlon Mack, who I've been a little harsh on the guy, but he's not a bad runner. He's not a bad running back by any means, and he is going to be a thorn in his side. And Marlon Mack could take like 5-10 carries a game, which isn't that huge of a deal. Like I said, Jonathan Taylor is going to be 5 yards per carry easily, but it does hurt him a little bit in that sense. And then on top of that, Jonathan Taylor has had some huge fumbling issues as well. So if he continues to fumble, if he's losing some catches, if he's losing some work to Marlon Mack on the ground, and then Nyheim Hines, who I'm in love with, nobody else is in love with, but I'm in love with Nyheim Hines. He's going to be the main pass catcher, in my opinion. So it limits him in that aspect. So you're really limited to a guy who you're relying on what he does on the ground. Let's say if he gets 100 yards and a touchdown, that's 16 points. That's not running back one material. And you're relying on him to get that type of production week in and week out. Not that it's impossible to do with his situation, but if he sees a larger role towards the end of the year, he could definitely be a high end running back too. But I'm just not as high on him as some other people are. He was my running, like, out of the top 3 in the class that were coming in this year. I think number 1 for me was J.K. Dobbins. Number 2 was Taylor, and then number 3 was DeAndre Swift, who we'll talk about in a little bit as well. But
Right.
not as much of a fan on Taylor as some other people.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Jonathan Taylor. He's my 101. Like if I'm in a rookie draft, he's my 101. And as far as redraft goes, I think he does have league winning upside. But right now he just has a committee problem, right? Marlon Mack, he's no slouch, right? But he's not Taylor, right? Nyheim
Yep.
Hines, like you said, he's going to be the main pass catcher in that backfield. Even though I think Taylor profiles as a true bell cow. I think he's very capable in the receiving game. Yeah, he had drops, but drops don't the drops don't really mean that at the next level that you can't catch passes or you're not going to be
No,
capable.
he's definitely capable.
He was only behind Zach Moss in yards per route run, out of all the draft eligible backs. So he has it, right? Now, this is probably not how Frank Reich wants to roll, like with him being a bell cow. And I mentioned this before when he was the offensive coordinator of the Chargers when they drafted Melvin Gordon in the first round. Gordon was in a committee with Danny Woodhead. Similar situation, right? That comp would be to Nyheim Hines. But they also have a very capable guy, Marlon Mack, as well on top of that. So if this were to reduce down to like a 2-back committee between Taylor and Hines with
Yeah.
like Mack in the background, this can easily be a 3-man backfield to start the year, and I think that's what's going to happen. So in redraft, that's why I'm not grabbing Taylor, right? There are other options who will give me more value in week 1, and I don't want to bank on him outperforming the rest of the backfield by so much that he's given the reins, right? In Dynasty, like I said, he's my 101, but in redraft this year, I think the price is a little too high for me because he's going in like the fourth round, early fourth round sometimes. Now, Marlon Mack isn't really the epitome of health, right? So if you end up with Taylor, there's a real chance that Taylor ends up being a serious asset at some point in the season, especially behind that offensive line. Now, like you said, he could break out, right? Second half of the season, that could definitely happen. Now, the way I would do it is instead of grabbing him in like the fourth round, I would just let
Trade.
someone else draft him.
Buy
And
low.
then, exactly. And after like week 4, week 5, you send little peanuts, right? You send like, hey, Kenny Stills had like a 2 touchdown game or some shit, and then pair him up with like, you know, David
Mark
Montgomery,
Ingram.
David Montgomery, who just had 3 games of like 13, 12, and 18 carries, and then you're like, all right, well, let's see. Look, he just had his 18 carry game. It's gonna happen, and then the Jonathan Taylor guy is just like, well, Jonathan Taylor isn't really doing much for me right now, so and I only have 2 wins. So let me do this deal. It's a shitty deal. I don't know where I got this deal from, but like it's like it's the shittiest deal of all
Kenny
time.
Stills and David Montgomery. Go get him. Go get him.
For it's
Kenny
Case
Stills in jail. He's literally in jail.
Hey man, listen, Kenny Stills might not have a lot of value today, right?
Uh-huh.
Actually, has zero value today,
Zero.
but in week 5, he might have
Five
some
it
value.
hard.
Uh, but yeah, man. So like that's part of the reason why. But what about Mark Ingram? How you feeling about him? And if you had to choose between the two, like in redraft leagues, who would you rather have?
I came to that decision not too long ago. So Mark Ingram, if I was guaranteed to pair Mark Ingram with J.K. Dobbins, I would take Mark Ingram over Jonathan Taylor. But the only thing with Mark Ingram, like I talked about him being an early guy. So last year, Mark Ingram had 15 total touchdowns with 48.3% of the snaps. This guy wasn't even in for over half the game. When he was in the game, they were using him. He had over 200 carries. But point being, like he wasn't always on the field, and a lot of this honestly can be contributed to how the Ravens played their games last year. There is a chance for Mark Ingram's snaps to go up. Interestingly enough, every time the Ravens blew another team out, which happened way more than it should have, they just kind of. I mean, how much was Robert Griffin III on the field last year? Like too much, I would
Right.
say. However much it was too much because they got up so high in so many games to the point where they took starters out so much in the game. Mark Ingram played his best when it was a competitive game. In the competitive games, he had like 50, 60% of the snaps. But in the games where they totally blew the other team out of the water, it was like it happened so fast. He didn't even have the chance to get value. So that compiled with having J.K. Dobbins in this backfield, who for me was the best running back in this class. I know Jonathan Taylor, as a runner, I would say Jonathan Taylor is definitely the best runner. But as a complete running back, I would say it's J.K. Dobbins. And if you look at what J.K. Dobbins does after he gets past that line of scrimmage, he is. I mean, I was looking for some sort of quality between all of these running backs for someone to separate themselves, and J.K. Dobbins had that. He's just the only way I can describe him is smooth. The way he acts and when he gets past that line of scrimmage. So we'll talk about him a little later. We'll see, hopefully. But between Mark Ingram and Jonathan Taylor, if I know I can pair Ingram with J.K. Dobbins, I would take Ingram in a heartbeat. And I might take Jonathan Taylor though, just because I like that ups. I don't know.
Yeah, I
I'm
think it's
back
about
and
the
forth. I'm
upside,
like on
right?
the fence.
Yeah, I think with Taylor it's about the upside, right? Between the two, I would say that Taylor does have more upside. Now, like obviously, there's no doubt that Mark Ingram was touchdown dependent last year, but when you're on an offense like the Ravens, it tends to work out, right? It's fine. Um, Now, I think we would have been a lot happier if Ingram actually got volume
Hmm.
on what was a ridiculously high volume rushing attack, right? But he didn't, right? He averaged 15 touches per game, and it seemed like 15 carries was his cap, right? They only give him the ball more than 15 times twice last season.
Yeah.
Right? Gus Edwards quietly rushed for 711 yards on only 70 carries, less than Ingram.
Garbage time.
Yeah, and
Garbage time.
Ingram capitalized with his goal line carries, right? He was only
Hmm.
two goal line carries away from the lead in attempts inside the 5, and he scored 8 of his 10 rushing touchdowns that way. Um, and then he scored 5 receiving touchdowns in the last 6 games, which I
And I
think
think two or
was,
three of them came in one game.
yeah, it was like super fluky. Like because like he caught those 5 receiving touchdowns on only 12 catches in those six
Yeah.
games. So he only caught 2 catches per game, averaged 2 catches per game over those 6 games, and caught 5 touchdowns on them. So, you bring in J.K. Dobbins now, who's a beast, an obvious upgrade over Gus Edwards, right? So, upgrade over both potentially, and this can be closer to a 50-50 split. Um, Dobbins has a ton of experience in the RPO, more than any other back in this draft. He has a ton of experience running out of shotgun. So there are a ton of similarities between what the Ravens are doing and what he did at Ohio State. He fits perfectly. Um, and I think it's crazy to say, but like you said, I think Dobbins has more upside than Ingram. Um,
Yeah.
Gus Edwards had 6 rushes inside the 5-yard line himself, and he didn't score on any of those. So if Dobbins can actually show that he's good at the goal line too, maybe that gap closes a little bit between him and Ingram. Ingram's in the 4th, Dobbins is in the 7th as far as ADP goes. They spent a second-round draft pick on him. Draft capital is there. And who would you rather have? Like, I would rather have the clear goal line guy, but I'm not sure there is a clear goal line guy right now. Like, I would guess Ingram because he's always been a good goal line back, like in his
Mhm.
career. But the delta might not be that big between him and Dobbins. They're almost the same size, right? Like, we know what Ingram's
Yeah.
cap is. Like, we know that Ingram's cap is like 15 carries a game. And maybe Dobbins' cap is not at 15 carries a game since he's a young buck, right? Young
Exactly.
Buckeye. You see what I did there? Uh,
Ah,
and they're, and maybe they were just trying to keep Ingram healthy, right? Because he's like 30 years old now,
yep.
right? Like they don't want to give him too much work. So Dobbins coming in, like, why would you cap that dude at 15 carries a game?
And by the way, I think the fact that they were up by such a large amount in so many games, it hurt Ingram more than we think. Because looking at, I have Robert Griffin's stats in front of me. Okay, ready? Let's play a little game here. How
Hmm,
many games do you think Robert Griffin played?
12.
Oh, seven.
Okay.
But in those 7 games, he had 38 pass attempts. And this wasn't a Lamar Jackson got hurt sort of situation. This
Right.
is what seven, like five, 6 pass attempts a game, right?
Right.
So I mean, he had a touchdown, 225 passing yards, 70 rushing yards. That's just too much for a backup. And what it really tells me is that they were just, I mean, even like if you look at first of that Miami game, I mean, I think it was like by the end of the third quarter, halfway through the third quarter, it was just the Robert Griffin show for the rest of the game. So, um, assuming, I mean, the team only got better. It only got better this offseason. So you want to assume that Lamar can't uphold that consistency and play at that level, and that they'll have a little bit of a downfall to the point where Ingram is on the field longer. But at the same time, I think they'd be jumping like when they put Gus Edwards in. I'm sure it was like, all right, take Ingram out, go put Gus, let him run out the clock. With a guy like Dobbins, they're like, let's go see what he can do. Like, let's take Ingram off the field. Let's put Dobbins in there. Let's have him catch some passes, do some fun plays. So I think they'll be wanting to put J.K. Dobbins on the field. So that could hurt Ingram. It's kind of a messy situation, but at the same time, if the offense, it's so funny. If the offense gets worse, Mark Ingram could get better? Question mark. I don't know.
No, I hear
It's
what you're saying. You're basically saying that if they're in
They
more
would stop
competitive games,
blowing these
then
teams
Mark,
out. He could
yeah,
do something.
right. No, I hear you.
Basically.
I hear you. And your point is well taken because Gus Edwards, like I think it looks like about 65% of his rushing totals have come in the second half of games,
I
right?
don't know if you find his
Yeah,
stats.
262 yards, 46 attempts for 262 yards in the first half of games, 87 attempts for 449 yards in the second half of games.
Absolutely. So, and I mean, J.K. Dobbins is my 30th ranked running back, but we kind of just covered most of him there. So, I mean, like, Ingram, I have here, like, Ingram was the running back one, and he was playing less than 50% of snaps. So, I mean, there's a world where J.K. Dobbins gets that other 50, so to speak, and
Yeah,
that he does something similar to what Ingram did last year, and he could be much more of a value at his current ADP. They already labeled him a 3-down running back via, I think it was Harbaugh. I think it was Harbaugh who said they love him as a 3-round running back. Did you see his reaction to
No,
getting? I think it was his reaction to. I think it was Duvernay, either Duvernay or J.K. Dobbins, that he was like really excited, but that they were able to get him, and he fits. It's that
he's
they
a
had
perfect
more rushing attempts than they almost 600 rushing attempts last year, which is like unheard of.
right.
So
And this is Ingram's last year of his contract, right? He's most
I
likely
think he's
gone.
got 2 years, but he's got to out after this year.
Oh, does he have out after this year? And he'll probably be out. I mean, I don't think they're going to pay him.
Yeah, I think he knows
So
that too.
J.K. Dobbins, like his sky's the limit in 2021. Man, like it's going to be sweet, man. I can totally see J.K. Dobbins going near the top 2 rounds in next year's draft.
He definitely should be. Definitely should be. So, um, that's nice. We were able to knock out 2 guys there.
There you go.
So, okay, the next guy, I'm gonna take the lead on because I think I'm the only truther left on the face of the earth.
Let's see if you're a truther after this podcast.
Oh, gosh, what do you have against my guy here? All right, so the guy's Darius Geis. He's my running back 27. I probably have him higher than a lot of people think he should be, but hear me out. Okay. So obviously he's had a lot of injury issues. The injuries are a huge concern. He had a nasty ACL tear 2 years ago, right in preseason. He missed his entire first year. That ACL got infected, delayed his recovery. The following season, he tears his meniscus on the opposite knee, which is important. The opposite knee, right?
Yo, Joey, I'm dying over here, bro.
And then he had an MCL tear, then he had a sprained MCL on the original knee, which is, whatever, sprained MCL, who cares? But the meniscus was on.
I'm trying to figure out where the positive is, like where you're going.
I had to get the negative out of the way first. That's the most important thing. So, first of all, preluding to the ACL and the meniscus, you can't label him as injury prone. The ACL did not cause the meniscus, and the meniscus was not caused by the ACL. You're prone to soft tissue injuries the year after ACL surgery, so especially because it was delayed.
Hold on, man. One can argue.
Okay.
One can argue that you if something happens on one leg and you're kind of recovering from it, that you kind of favor the other leg. You favor that leg, and the other leg's doing more work.
Soft tissue injuries happen because of his surgery.
All right, Dr. Joey. All right, man.
All right.
Go for it.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
By the way, do you know how Frank Gore started his career?
Same way?
Frank Gore, early in his career, his
Do not
first
tell me he started like Darius
he
Geis.
had 2 ACL tears and a meniscus tear.
Really?
In his first 3, and he's 35 years old. He's still playing in the NFL. But you know what's different about Frank? He's 35 years old.
I thought he was older than that.
He's still playing. His first 3 years, he had 2 ACL tears and a meniscus tear.
Wow.
And he's still playing today. That's the best point I think I could have brought up for that. And we're just talking about his injuries right now. We're not even talking about the player. So in 5 games last year that Geis played, he averaged 11.6 points per game. Not bad, right? Including his first game back from the meniscus tear. This will tell you that he's still an explosive player. The first play, he broke off a 45-yard reception touchdown. That was the very first play he was back on the field. And if you remove the games, like we did this before with James Conner, if you take out the games where Geis was injured during the game, which would be week 1 and his last game, he averaged 15.5 points per game. And a lot of that came after the meniscus tear. So he's still an explosive player. He's 23 years old. He was an elite college athlete. If you saw this guy on tape, he was bouncing off defenders just like Marshawn Lynch. That's who everybody was comping him to when he was coming out of college. He was easily one of my favorite running backs in the class. He's recovered from his MCL sprain. Obviously, the meniscus is a bit of an issue, but he's been working out a ton this offseason. If you've seen the videos of him putting the pressure on his knee, he's been doing fine. He's doing all the workouts, and he's a great pass catcher. I mean, this is this is the definition of a true workhorse back if he's on the field and healthy. If he's on the field and healthy, 16 games, he'd easily be a low-end running back one, even with this bad offensive line. Because what I talked about before, that 15.5 points per game, that was last year. That was with a lot of that was with Dwayne Haskins, right? He didn't have the luxury of playing with Case Keenum when they had a reliable quarterback in a sense.
Imagine calling Case Keenum a luxury.
But that's what it was. That's what he was last year. Ultimately, like he made Dwayne Haskins better. Like he gave Dwayne Haskins the ability to dump off the ball to him and look for other weapons. He had a huge presence in the running game. So obviously, there's a very big chance this is a running back by committee. But he had 5.8 yards per carry last year. A little fluky because he didn't get that much work. The offensive line, they still have Morgan Moses and they still have Brandon Sheriff, right? So they still is Morgan Moses on the team?
Yeah.
I don't want to get that wrong. But they still have Brandon Sheriff, who two of the better offensive linemen in the league. The rest of the line is pretty shaky, but it's not a terrible. There's other lines who are worse. And another thing, I want to talk about Antonio Gibson for a second because everybody's saying how Antonio Gibson is going to be a huge thorn inside. I really don't believe that. So Antonio Gibson in Memphis, right? Not a big school. We talked about Darrell Henderson. We didn't talk about Darrell Henderson, but Darrell Henderson coming in from Memphis. Everybody was like, oh, he was so efficient in college. He did so well, but he's playing at shit schools.
It's true.
Right? I mean, and then Darrell Henderson leaves. You'd say, oh, maybe a guy like Antonio Gibson would be the workhorse, but he wasn't. He barely saw any work. He did great with the work he saw, but those were designed plays. And he was
mostly involved in the passing game, though.
He was mostly involved when they drafted him, and when the Redskins drafted him, right? In my head, I'm like, why do they need another running back? If anything, they just got Bryce Love last year. Whatever the case, they had Adrian Peterson, they have Darius Geis. I don't see the need for them to draft another running back, but I think it was more of a luxury.
They also signed, what's his face from
Peyton Barber.
Bucks, Peyton Barber.
Fuck Peyton Barber. I don't care about Peyton Barber.
No, I'm just saying, like, look how crowded this room is. Like they definitely didn't need another early down back. That's for sure.
They definitely didn't. That's for sure. But let's see. So my friend Fantasy Docs, Nathan Nitwa. I don't want to mess his name up. Yeah, Nathan Natwa. So he talked about how he's not really too much concerned with his injury history as much as the crowded backfield. So obviously the meniscus is going to be the only thing. But 2 years removed from that ACL is usually when, especially running backs, are in the prime position to bounce back in that sense. There's not that many running backs in the 6th, 7th round that you say, like, look, if Darius Geis plays 16 games, he could be a running back one, even in this offense. They would lean on him. And we talked about how Frank Gore started his career. I'm just really in on Darius Geis. I've been in on him since his rookie year. Maybe I've transitioned from Corey Davis fever to Darius Geis fever, and I'm hoping it just works out so much better than Corey Davis did. Not a good comp.
Well, I'm a fan of Darius Geis as a person. Like, I think like he's fun. Like, I want him to succeed.
You're like, he's a cool guy.
Yeah, no, I think he is a cool guy. Like, I try to just like him, but
he blocked me on Instagram.
He blocked you on Instagram?
Yeah.
Dude, does he know that you're Darius Geis truther? I'm gonna DM him and be like, yo, you blocked my boy Joey. He's your biggest fan.
I made a post about him last year because he was coming off an ACL tear. I wasn't a fan of him.
Did you tag him?
I did. It was dumb.
Why are you tagging players, man? Shit, man. You still tag players now?
When it's a good post.
When it's a good post, good. That's what you gotta do.
I learned my mistake. I'm also blocked by Matthew Berry for whatever fucking.
Matthew Berry blocked you, man? Matthew Berry. Anyway, my assumption is that Geis is going to be the lead back for the Redskins this year. They have Adrian Peterson, who they just re-signed. Peterson has this weird habit of like signing to places without talking to the coach about his role. Like multiple times, like since he was over the hump. Like this shit happened in New Orleans. Like he signed a contract and then he's like, wait, what? Like I'm only going to get 4 carries a game. Like what's going on?
And then last year they started him in the inactive list.
Yeah, exactly. Last year he had a problem with that, right? Because Geis was the guy in week 1, right? Mm-hmm. And then he got hurt. But now the way that Scott Turner describes Peterson's role is, quote unquote, there is a role for him on this team. So there's not really like a ringing endorsement.
It's right here.
Right? But Geis, I think Geis is the favorite right now to be the main guy, but I do think that Antonio Gibson likely will be a big part of the pass game as well.
Yeah.
Geis can catch too, and I think he will still catch some balls on early downs if Gibson, is like a guy who they bring in on passing downs and stuff like that. But I think everyone wants to compare like the way that Turner used Christian McCaffrey last year, and 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 that was because Christian McCaffrey is like a one of one skill set type of guy.
Yeah,
It doesn't mean that Turner's going to try and
that's
turn.
why I didn't even bring it up.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that Turner is going to try and turn everyone into McCaffrey, but to me, I think like Geis is just like he's just a flyer to me. Like he has a lot of injury risk because of his meniscus repair. Um, and more about like him actually being able to have a huge workload because of that meniscus repair. So I think that combined with the crowded running back room is why I'll probably stay away from him this year. Um, I
Okay.
just it depends on who's on the board at that spot and also how my running backs look. Like if I can afford to take a running back for upside, then I might go in that direction. But um, there isn't too many drafts where I think that I'm going to be at that position at that spot to look at him and say like, all right, I'm going to take him as a flyer.
Okay. I can respect that. And at the same time, do you remember what we talked about before with Evan Ingram? How we
Yeah.
talked about how with these injury prone guys, we kind of have to downplay the injury scenario because of COVID, right? Because of any player could be taken out at a week's notice from a
Hmm.
couple weeks at a time. So
Right.
if
Right.
we talk about who the player is when that player is on the field, and Darius Geis did prove when he came off the meniscus tear that he can score 15, what is it, 15
I,
points per game.
okay, that's where I'm going to disagree with you because I don't think he has enough body of work in the NFL to say that he's going to be able to do it.
Okay, I can respect
Evan
not seeing
Ingram
enough of it. I
I
can
haven't.
respect that.
Yes, I haven't seen enough of Darius Guys. Like I've seen flashes. Like there
Mhm.
have been a couple runs where I'm like, holy shit! Like this guy is good, man. You know what I'm saying? Like I just wish that he could stay healthy and like do more of it. You know what I mean? So that's why I
Yeah.
like him. I'm a fan. I want him to succeed. With Evan Ingram though, it's different because we he's a
We
beast.
have seen.
Like we've
He hit like
seen him.
70, 700 yards his rookie year. So,
Yeah, man, he killed it. You know what I'm saying? And by the way, I did more research after our tight end podcast on Evan Ingram,
mhm.
and I think the two concussions, the two MCL sprains, which doesn't tend to reoccur, the Liz Frank injury is the main issue, and I think the main concern is that there could be a dip in production, but not necessarily re-injury. So if there's a slight reduction in production, a dip in production, like a 25% dip in production with Evan Ingram, like, is that something you need to be really crazy worried about? No, I don't think so because like his normal production is amazing,
Yep.
right? And then if you just take away 20-25% of that, it's still good when it comes
Mhm.
to a tight end.
Still better
So
than a lot of other
so
tight
now I'm
ends.
looking at him in the seventh round and I'm like, looking kind of juicy right there. Anyway, I digress.
Anyway, so that's my Darius Guy spiel.
There's your Darius Guy spiel, and there's my injection of a random tight end in this
Love
podcast
it.
episode. Same
Okay,
division. That's all.
so
That's the only thing that has to do with it. Anyway,
there you go. Some relation, injuries, same division, maybe. So let's try to fit in at least these two guys here.
yes.
After that, we'll see, where we stand. But so DeAndre Swift, Cam Akers, two rookie running backs who I'm not really high on at all. I've been swapping between which one of these two guys I like better. But we'll talk about Cam Akers first because I know you're a little bit of a Cam Akers fan. So he could walk on as the team's running back one, and I think he will. But it's a pass heavy offense. How involved is he going to be in the passing game? Todd Gurley last year, he was relatively involved, but now they have Tyler Higbee, who had that big finish to the year. Gerald Everett's going to be healthy on the field. Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods. He's a rookie. I don't know how much you want to really rely on him in that aspect. At the same time, it's an awful offensive line. They didn't do anything to improve that. I think they were ranked 32nd last year. So that's not helpful. And then, like they have, if Daryl Henderson is healthy, he could have somewhat of a role. I think Daryl Henderson's going to be spotty here and there. He could take some early down work, take some passing down work. Malcolm Brown could easily be that goal line back. right? He could easily have that goal line role. So I'm just not too hot on where Cam Akers stands in this pass heavy offense where Jared Goff's going to be throwing the ball 40 times a game. He really needs to rely on being a part of that, a consistent part of that passing game. If he does get that locked down, I'll go back in my word and I'll say he'll be a running back too. But I just have doubts as a rookie for him to come in with a limited training camp, a limited offseason, come in and be that main guy in passing down situations. So I have my doubts about Cam Akers. I don't love the offensive line. I don't love the fact that it could be a three-way backfield. So and I don't think it's necessarily a Todd Gurley situation where he comes in and just commands this role. So I'm not too hot on Cam Akers.
Yeah, I don't think Cam Akers has a ton of competition to be the 1A in this backfield. The Rams took him with their first pick.
Yeah, I can see him being 1A.
Yeah, Darrell Henderson hasn't shown much, but I don't think there's going to be 1B and C. You know what I mean? Darrell Henderson hasn't shown much, and they drafted Akers a year after they drafted Henderson. If they really thought they had something in Henderson and they just needed something to complement him, I don't think they would have drafted somebody high enough. They might have waited. This is a deep running back class. They could have waited.
I guess, but at the same time, I don't know where the priorities lie because last year they traded up for Darrell Henderson, and I feel like for them, Henderson would have been that complement to Gurley, like long term wise,
Yep.
would have been that complement to keep Gurley healthy. So I
Yeah.
feel like they have a set role for Henderson, who by the way was injured a lot of last year and didn't really get to play to his full potential either. Although I'm still on board with the whole small school, it's explosive, can't really count
Right.
on that. But I don't think this is the last we've seen of Henderson, who by the way had
Of course not.
9.3
No, no, I
yards.
don't think so. I actually think that he is a compliment, right? Like, and he's going to serve that
And
same
then
role
at the same
now.
time, Malcolm Brown had 5 rushing touchdowns last year.
Right.
So I still think it's going to be somewhat of a committee, but I do agree that Cam Akers does come in and gets the at least the head of the work in this backfield.
Yeah, no, I can totally see that. And like when you look at Malcolm Brown, like, that first game that I think the first game of the season, he had 2 touchdowns, right? And everyone's like panicking about Todd Gurley, but Todd Gurley got that work later on.
Yeah.
Later on, when they realized that they needed some production in that backfield and they weren't getting it with those other guys. Now
Mhm.
they had a whole year. See, with Darrell Henderson is that like, hindsight's 2020, right? Like they draft a guy like, okay, he's gonna be the complement to Todd Gurley. It's just like the Chiefs, right? When the Chiefs drafted Mecole Hardman, I think if Tyreek Hill wasn't in a shitload of trouble at that point, they wouldn't have drafted Mecole Hardman, right? I think if Todd Gurley was completely healthy and he didn't have all of these questions surrounding his knee, they wouldn't have drafted Darrell Henderson,
But then would they have
right?
drafted Cam
And now,
Akers?
what's that?
Would they have drafted Cam Akers then?
If they already had Todd Gurley on the team and not cut him? No, I don't
Yeah.
think so. I think
Yeah.
they wanted, I think more than anything, they wanted to save $10 million on a running back. Right? Like, I think that's really what it came down to. Like,
Yeah.
if Todd Gurley was $5 million, would they have cut him? Probably not. I probably not. Right? I mean, I think, I think not. And when you talk about COVID, dude, like I think not getting any rookie, including him, in front of coaches during this pandemic, it hurts all these rookies, including
Yeah.
Akers. I think he profiles as a potential 3 down back off the bat, not an every down back, but a 3 down back, meaning he gets
3 down
opportunity.
capable. Yeah.
He gets an opportunity in all 3 downs. Um, like the way I kind of see this backfield shaken out is Akers like as the 1A getting opportunity in all 3 downs, maybe like 60%, 70% of the snaps at best, with Henderson coming in as a complement, right? I don't think Malcolm Brown adds much, to be honest. I think bringing him on the field will be like from a safety perspective, like don't fuck this up perspective, right? Like it's like when there's a play where like, oh, particular thing needs to happen where like exemplary pass blocking on a certain play, something like that.
Hmm.
All right, put Malcolm Brown in, right? And that's okay, right? Like Akers has experience with a terrible offensive line throughout his college career, right? And has averaged still like 5 yards a carry, still taking defenders with him. His line isn't as bad as it was in college. When you look at the 2 lines, right? Like this line can be better. Guys like Whitworth, who played like shit last year, if he can step up to what we know he is,
He was
young
also like
guys,
38.
Yeah, but he's better than what he played as last year. And towards the second half of the year, this line played way better than they did in the first half. Those young guys got hurt early in the year on that line. Um, but yeah, like I think Akers is good at making something out of nothing, and he was one of the best in forced missed tackles and in yards after contact. 80% of his production on the ground last year was after contact on the ground. So like, and you consider the fact that they still use Todd Gurley as a workhorse despite his knee issues last year,
Mm-hmm.
even though they had Brown and Henderson, that tells me a lot as well. So for me, like I'll be fine drafting him as like one of my bench running backs, like either my RB4 or RB3 at the most. But that would be a guy that's going to be on my bench to start the year, not necessarily somebody I'm comfortable necessarily putting in my flex in week 1, only because of the whole COVID situation,
Yeah.
right? If they had a real, by the way, all this news coming about all these teams starting training camp next week for the rookies and stuff like that. Ooh, I'm excited. It's gonna be super interesting.
I
Whatever
wish
happens
we
this
could
year,
go. I wish we
I
could
know.
go, but it's
But I'm
just
just
not.
happy this training camp. Like some teams are just like, all right, training camp starting. Chiefs is starting next week. Texans is starting next week. It's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be great. So I'm happy. I'm happy that there's gonna be some news coming out. You know what I'm saying? I wonder like how it's gonna
The
work with
rumors.
media being there and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We'll see. I can't wait.
So, so then it comes to a point where are you drafting Cam Akers though? Because from what I know, his ADP is like what, like maybe the tail end of the fifth, early sixth.
Yes, exactly.
So, and I don't know if that's a spot I really want to take a chance on a rookie.
Yeah, no, I hear you, man. And if I'm drafting today, like a real draft, it's gonna be
Mhm.
tough for me to draft any rookie. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? It's more like the way I look at it is that I'm projecting these guys to like have a normal camp, kind of. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And if they go through a normal camp, where do I think they'll end up?
Gotcha.
That's how I'm looking at it, right? If I'm drafting a real draft today, like I'm not drafting any of these guys because it's going to be especially wide receivers. You know what I'm saying? Let
Yeah.
alone running backs. Like running backs have a lot easier time fit into schemes and be able to run the ball, but I just it's going to be hard for me to, especially high draft capital, like fifth round pick, like on a rookie, like that's really tough. Um, but if things go the way that I think they're going to go and they have a normal camp, I don't know how likely that is, but if they do have a normal camp, I think that it's going to be a situation where the best guy is going to be on the field.
I can see that. I can see that. So let's get into this guy here, DeAndre Swift, who I have him at 28, but he's gonna be going way down after this because the more I'm like talking about all these rookies and shit like that. I mean, look, DeAndre Swift, it's gonna be a committee, right? He's not gonna come in and command a role. He wasn't a workhorse in college. Um, he's not guaranteed to
Hey,
be
hey, give me a second, okay? My kid just woke up.
okay.
You hear that?
Yeah, if you need a mute, I could talk. It's no worries. If you need to go take care of that, I can talk about Darius Geis some more. I don't mind.
We can pause it for a sec.
Can we pause the recording?
Yeah, we can. Well, I'll just put it on mute and then we'll re-edit it. Cool.
147.
Hey.
All right. So I got it clocked down at 147.
Okay. Cool.
All right. So should we just continue as if
Yeah, I think we can continue. Wherever you were at. I'm not sure where you were at.
I just thought
Did we
about
start talking about Swift?
DeAndre Swift? Yep. So
Okay.
DeAndre Swift, he's gonna be in a committee, right? I mean, he's not even guaranteed to be the running back one on his team, right? Because on Johnson, if he's on the field, if he's healthy, he's still a good running back. And I think
Is
it's
he?
going to take. Well, he's not a bad running back, but point being, DeAndre Swift, he's not a great pass protector. So he's a great pass catcher. Don't
Yes.
get me wrong, he's a fantastic pass catcher. but he's never been a workhorse. He's not a great pass blocker. And the Lions, just they haven't had a steady running back since Barry Sanders. So I don't know. It's just hard for me to trust. We talked about rookie. We'll put COVID, rookie, training camp stuff aside. Just the player in general, it's hard for me to buy into a guy like DeAndre Swift in an offense like the Lions. Even though they do want to be a run-heavy team, I don't know if they're really going to have a chance to have that type of identity with that defense, with all the hits they took with losing Darius Slay. Which I know was their choice. They got Jeff Okuda, but they don't really have any linebackers. Their defensive line took some hits. So I'm not, I don't know. I think they're going to be in a lot of passing situations just like they were last year. I'm not buying into DeAndre Swift. I don't want to take him as my running back 3. As my running back 4, maybe, but even as upside, I think even if DeAndre Swift earns that running back 1 role, I think it'll be a 1A. I think guys like Kerryon can still be involved in this offense. So
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's going to be a committee with Carry-On. Even Carry-On was never really handed the keys,
yeah,
right? There was a period of like 3 weeks last year where he averaged more than 70% of snaps, but at that point he had like zero competition, right? Swift has some competition with Carry-On, although I think that Swift is the superior talent here. With all these rookies having no rookie camp and all that, obviously it's going to be tough to project them, killing all their competition before the season starts. So if Carry-On were to get hurt like he did in his first 2 years in the NFL, I think Swift will be a major commodity. He'll have no other competition, right? Carry-On last year, he didn't have more than 53 rushing yards in any game last year, except against the Chiefs, who we know were terrible against the run. He was given 26 carries in that game. He had more than 100 yards. But if I had to guess right now, Swift, like if they have a normal camp, everything goes relatively smoothly. I think he's going to be their RB1, and then Carry-On is going to be that 1B. He was extremely inefficient last year, but I think with early second round draft capital, like it's tough to be optimistic for Carry-On.
yeah,
He's talented as hell. Swift is talented as hell in the run game. He's a great pass catcher. He definitely has some upside here. And we've seen certain roles in the past where Matt Stafford will gladly dump it down if he has a capable guy in coming out of the backfield. So that can happen here with Swift. That's not out of the realm of possibility. The only thing is that if Kerryon stays healthy, it's going to be tough for Swift to really kind of like leap off the page as far as opportunity goes.
yeah, absolutely. And my camera's falling here. I'm getting lower and lower. And that also means we're approaching 2 hours. So, um, technically we got about 5 or 6 more guys to go through. But if you want, what I was thinking, and I'll see if everybody else is interested in this, is we cap it off here. We have our first 15. The last 15 goes up to 30. I know I want to talk about Naheem Hines so badly, but I can wait a little bit. So what I'm thinking is we do wide receivers part 2. We can have that out next week. And the following week, we'll go back and we'll do sleepers, guys that we haven't mentioned at each position. So we can go back and talk about quarterbacks we didn't mention, running backs, wide receivers, tight end. We get one sleeper mega episode.
Sounds good.
Sounds good?
Sounds good to me, man.
All right. So that means we're going to end it off here at the 1 hour 52. Might have to shave it down a little bit, something like 50. You got an hour 50 minutes of us talking to you guys. So I hope you guys enjoyed some portion of that.
Joey, there's nobody here.
Yeah, there's nobody here.
We're just talking to ourselves at this point.
If you guys, okay, I'm curious. If you guys are here, DM me or like comment. What's the word? What word can we use? So it's
DM us on Instagram.
No, but like it has to be a word, like a secret word. Like say like French fries.
Oh,
say French fries.
Word?
You know what I'm saying?
DM
like if you're here, tell us like French fries or something. I'll see if I can get I'll give you 50% off like a draft kit or something. I'm just so curious. I just want to know if somene's like here. And
if you DM me, I'll give you 50% off Joey's draft kit.
So 100% if you DM both.
No.
No, I'm not.
I'm not trying to take all your money over here, Joey.
All right. Well, that's gonna end it for this week. Thank you guys. It's hard to like follow up something like that. Thank you guys for listening, and hopefully we'll be back with wide receivers part 2 next week, and then stay tuned for that sleeper episode in the future because that'll be really good too. So, Thanks as always for following. We're losing it.
Oh yeah,
Thanks as always for
it's
being
late.
here, Faraz. Follow us on Instagram. I'm at fantasy.football.analyst. Follow Faraz. If you're watching on YouTube, all our links will be in the description. So, all right. Thanks. See you guys.
See ya.